Thank you very much, Your Serene Highnesses and Court Leber, to invite me to talk on Only Evidence Matters towards a rational dialogue on GMOs. So, as an introduction, I would like to say that it's generally accepted that transgenesis knowledge can improve on knowledge of natural processes, but also leads to agricultural, industrial, and socio-economical changes, which could affect human society at large, and which may consequently require a good regulation, evidence-based regulation. It often states that developing countries are most likely to benefit from plant biotechnology and are at the same time most likely to be affected by the deployment of such new technology, including the new one, the genome editing. It is a common yet repeated fact that the general public neither have full access to accurate scientific information, nor does it always have an adequate understanding of farming and its agricultural biotechnologies. This can easily turn into an ethical problem when amplified by the distortion of evidence, and the GMO case is a living proof. So we can read in the newspaper or in the internet that GMO cause cancer, colony collapse disorder of bees, suicide of Indian farmers in India, effect of non-target organisms, and sterile seeds. So, thereby topics of interest are not only patenting and restriction for breeders and farmers by seed companies, but also of destruction of scientific research, especially in France, and harassment of researchers studying GMOs, including in France, and harassment of farmers growing GMO in some countries, especially in Germany, and the construction of their own parallel science by opponents, as well as politically motivated distortion of scientific evidence by some governments, some non-government organizations, and some media and social media. So the numerous uncovering reports that are dispersed and inflated through the internet have serious consequences for academic research, both in developing and not-developing countries, and the public-private knowledge concerning the risk-benefit assessment of GMO cultivation for human and animal consumption. Pseudo-scientific facts are created, manipulated by some the so-called scientists, and their communication is amplified by journalists and anti-GMO NGOs through the internet. Journalists make words or numbers say what they want. I would just take an example. Some GM plants are tolerant to insect or to herbicide. Is completely scientifically false. We should say some GM plants are tolerant to certain insect or to certain herbicide. This is true. It's not all insect or all herbicide. But it's very important, this difference. So, because in the internet or in a debate or when we are talking with some journalists, you have to choose your side. Are you pro or anti-GMO? So you have to choose your words or numbers. So now the problem for some journalists, not all journalists, is not whether it's true. Today's conviction are become form of evidence. It's what we call in France le pré-pensé, the pre-fruit. It's a guiding oriented discourse. What matters is not the definition of the word, is the consensus it maintains. As speech, any ideology is a code with its own words or number, which allow it to triumph. So we observe more and more an irrational but especially tenacious belief. And it seems that we have moved from a knowledge society to a belief society by challenging peer-reviewed scientific data, especially in the internet. So I would like with you to examine two major examples. First of all, the fertility of the seed sterility rumor, and secondly, the patenting and restriction for breeders and farmers. On March 1998, the USPTO issued patent control of plant gene expression, granting Delta and Pine company in the US the exclusive right to license the new technology. This new technology was named Genetic Use Restriction Technologies. Although no company has ever commercialized a biotech trace that results in sterile seeds, such potential sterility raised concern for small landholders farmers. We cannot afford to purchase seed every year. This potential sterility prohibits seed saving. It is unclear whether or not such genetic use restriction technology, dubbed Terminator by the anti-GMO organization Rural Advance Foundation International, which is the predecessor of ETC group, and the so-called suicide seeds by this group are actually functional. This genetic use restriction technology are the product of genetic engineering, which enables sexually reproduced plants to produce sterile seeds, or inactivate a desired trait in the second generation after sowing the seed from the first plant in the first generation. Since the first patent on March 1998 was published and banned under a de facto moratorium in 2000 by the COP5, which was reaffirmed in 2006, this technology are among the most controversial up to date. Genetic use restriction technology are perceived as a tool to force farmers to depend on multinational corporation seed monopolies. On the other hand, it would be desirable to prevent transgene flow, to prevent foreign genes from spreading to sexually compatible conventional crop, especially in the case of transgenic plants engineered to produce pharmaceutical or other bioproducts, and which are grown outdoors, not in greenhouse or as cell culture in a scientific way. Nevertheless, campaigns against Terminator gene are constantly launched, and many people, erroneously, believe that all GMOs produce sterile seeds in the internet. I will take another example regarding intellectual property protection of plant innovation. The objection of the principle of patenting of living objects, of part of objects such as genes and transgenes, has fueled opposition to biotechnology. In a more concrete way, the ethical issue deals with the tools to protect plant variety and biotechnological innovation, as transgenes, as well as the consequences of intellectual property rights on access to plant genetic resources for breeding. In addition, the condition under which a plant variety can be multiplied by a farmer for his or her own use, the production called farm-set seeds, have also been debated. However, it's important to keep in mind that intellectual property protection of plant innovation varies from country to country, depending on the cultural and political background. So I would like to describe what is going on in Europe and what is going on in the US. So in European Union, plant varieties are not patentable. But protection of biotechnological invention, for example, transgenes, is obtained by patent. If this invention is new, as an inventing step, and industrial applicability. In Europe, the only way to predict a plant variety is a plant breeder's right, as defined by the UPOV convention. A list of crops for which farm-safe seed is allowed in Union has been published. It's 24 species. In order to support innovation in plant breeding, a system was created collecting fees from farmers, it's a few euros per hectare, using farms and seed, has been established in certain member states, including France, Portugal, Spain, and UK for it. The UC regulation provides exception for the breeder's right. The breeder's privilege allowing access to plant genetic resources for further research and plant breeding. Every private breeder or public breeder can get a plant genetic resources to build up a new variety. It's a free trade between breeders. In EU, transgenic plants carrying a patented event, a patented transgene, fall within the scope of the patent, since this element is not limited to a single variety. And at the same time, a transgenic variety can also be individually protected by a plant variety protection certificate. The variety cannot be patented in Europe. It's not allowed. In America, in contrast, it's possible to patent plant varieties with a limited research exception and no possibility for farm-safe seed. The plant breeder has the following option to protect innovation. For biotechnical invention, the patent, the so-called utility patent, as in Europe, but with no specific exemption for plant breeding, no breeder's privilege, or farm-safe seeds. For plant variety, different solutions are available. The Plant Patent Act and the Utility Patent. It depends on the system of reproduction of the plant. So given the obvious imbalance of the scope of variety protection between the European PVPC and patent, it's not surprising that in America, breeders are massively applying for patent protection for their varieties. Farm-safe seeds and access to transgenic varieties as a genetic resources for further research and breeding are not allowed in America. I don't know if you know the case in Canada. There is a famous case in Canada. In North America, Monsanto, now Bayer, imposed contracts to farmers who want to purchase its GM seeds, in which these farmers commit themselves to not saving and replanting seeds produced from the purchased seeds. Farmers are also free to buy GM seed, but these contracts have largely contributed to the detestable image of this company. It's often viewed as a non-ethical since it prevents a practice, a traditional practice, that has been part of agriculture for centuries. It has led to a worldwide David against Goliath narrative after Monsanto sued a Canadian farmer, Monsieur Percy Schmeisser, for patent infringement. Although Percy Schmeisser lost at all 3 federal courts level available to him, the courts conclude that the farmer deliberately used Monsanto seeds. The opinion was left to believe that farmers could face penalties for patent infringement when seeds grow spontaneously in their field, as a consequence of undesired gene flow, for example. And Monsanto explanation failed to counteract with farmer bullying narrative up to now. So, what can we do towards a rational dialogue on GMO? So I would like to suggest some solution for an ethics of discourse and discussion. So As I said in the introduction, the numerous unconfirmed reports are dispersed and inflated through the internet, have serious consequences for academic research and concerning the risk-benefit assessments. So while scientific facts, evidence have accumulated for decades on end, the challenge is how to make the general public aware of them. That's the challenge. So we suggest to develop an active reception. So we suggest to train students in ethics, to build up a pedagogy that aims to develop critical thinking and the art of arguing. How to learn how to write a scientific article according to a scientific approach and according to ethical rules. To learn how to communicate the scientific evidence. To give way to real learning of the practice of the debates of ideas, such in-class debate. So for an intelligence biofortification. So in terms of deontology, there are several studies which were published showing that there are fraud, suspected fraud, duplication, plagiarism. So 76% of retraction were due to scientific misconduct in paper, retracted from a specific journal in a study which was published in 2016. In 2012, another study previously found that about 67.4% of the total retractation can be attributed to misconduct. So we need to learn how to write a paper with ethical principle. So the famous article we watched retracted a year after the scandal made by Seralini and his group is a big example to discuss with students in science at the university. We should promote integrity in research publication. So according to the journal, the retractation procedures differ, but they are still ethical principles. And there is a committee on publication ethics, which was established in 1997 by a small group of medical journal editors in the UK. And now more than 12,000 members worldwide from all academic fields are members of this COPE. Many of the available articles offer little information on how knowledge has actually been produced and the limits of empirical validity of the data. Every scientific article has to undergo a critical reading before its conclusion can be accepted. Malinowski is a doctor, and his group published an important paper in 2000 to discuss the tools for assessing the scientific value of a study. So it's a very important paper to learn the scientific approach, and I use this paper with my students. And I ask them to put this, to address this question. Is the question, the scientific question clearly addressed? Is the method adapted to the objectives? Is the population studied clearly identified? If the control population clearly identified? Is the sample size suitable? Are the analyzed variables clearly identified? Is the choice of variables adapted to the objective? Is the duration of follow-up sufficient? Are statistical methods appropriate? Are the results presented in a clear, detailed, and objective manner? Are the conclusions validated? Is the impact of the article important? So we should learn this scientific approach. But we should also alert on the distortion of scientific evidence. distortion of scientific evidence by policies, and distortion of scientific evidence by the media. I would like to give you some examples. With my colleagues, Marcel Kuntz and John Davison, we published a paper in Nature Biotechnology, and we analyzed point by point the scientific arguments put forward by the previous French government to justify its ban on growing this Bt maize in 2012. And we show that genuine scientific documents, including from rules from the European Food Safety Authority in Parma, in Italy, have been misinterpreted. And we show that other major scientific articles that do not go in the direction desired by the government have been ignored. Scientific authors, cited by the French government in his report, testified that their findings were diverged from their meaning, as you can read here. So we did that in the name of ethical value. We decided to bring to the attention of all this type of unethical behavior, thus to alert on this drift of interference of the political in the evaluation. And we think that the journal Nature Biotechnology do that in the name of ethical values. Ensuring the separation of risk assessment and risk management ensures the independence of researchers and the credibility of policy. So it's very important. So what's going on with the distortion of evidence by the media? We, scientists, have a difficulty obtaining a right of reply when our scientific evidence are misinterpreted in the journals. And so the appropriation of scientific knowledge is prevented, and the distorted knowledge via the internet is really difficult to rectify. Science and even scientific reasoning are challenging today. We observe more and more action to prohibit thinking and food, and it seems dangerous because it what feeds extremism. Today, the information is not what happened, but the communication of what happened. We have seen that with the Seralini scandal 7 years ago. My colleague, Marcel Kuntz, defined postmodernism as an ideology whose aim is to deconstruct Enlightenment values. He said, implicitly, postmodernism considers that scientists cannot be trusted and that their research must be subject to a democratic process, more precisely to a participative democracy. There are several reasons for this mistrust: the deregulation of the information market and strong exposure to social media. The information market has been deregulated, allowing previously marginalized or ostracized to spread freely, such as the idea that seed of all GMO are sterile. There is also today very often a general lack of scientific knowledge among journalists and politicians. So we are witnessing increasingly irrational reaction from citizens and ignorant people, and this is dangerous for science and for dialogue. If dialogues become impossible between citizens, it's damaging for all parties. As Kuntz again said, obviously scientists should also listen to laypersons. True democratization of science means that anyone should get a chance to study science, or at least to have a decent scientific culture to make informed choice. So, journalists and some anti-GMO NGOs have a good grasp of communication techniques based on the fact that citizens do not differentiate between risk and danger. Science can prove the existence of a risk, but not its non-existence. NGOs and some journalists tirelessly pursue their pastoral fear amplified by the internet. So in front of those who broadcast fake news, it's essential to mobilize. Initiatives already exist to open paths of reflection and criticisms, such as the award to journalists who have written an evidence-based article. So this is an initiative of my Academy of Agriculture of France since 2018. Solution 3 is to develop way against naivety and paranoia conspiracy, to encourage the recipient of the information, the candid, not to validate mechanically as true what he or she hears, and not to consider the form that the message takes as the only possible one and has having no impact on his understanding. Although the public has a predominantly positive view of science and scientists, science is seen by some as a tool of the service of the interests of major economic actors. Some journalists and anti-GMO NGOs accuse scientists of being the henchmen of the industrial sector. It's a frontal accusation that closes the door to any possible objection, accompanying a sort of intimidation. So, compliance in the laziness of mind citizens that reject as a whole what he, she cannot analyze. And we can hear, I'm not told the truth. If equipped with critical tools and varied angles of approach, the adept of this kind of attitude could access an intellectual reasoning less anxious and more fruitful. So, for conclusion, I would like to say that we constantly need to produce evidence-based content to fight fake news and ensure that pupils, high school students, and students at the university never forget when leaving their courses that retreat for reflection and criticisms are the two means enabling them to defend science against obscurantism and freedom. So I would like to thank you for your kind attention, and I show you evidence-based books we publish since 1998. Thank you.